The void between worlds wasn't empty. Not really. It was just filled with the dust of forgotten things, the ghosts of dead stars, and the silence of journeys that ended too soon. And it was in this graveyard that Kalen made his living. He was a rifter, a scavenger of cosmic shipwrecks, a man who piloted a vessel cobbled together from the bones of a dozen other ships, a mechanical mutt he called the Magpie. For 10 years, the Magpie had been his home, his shell, his only reliable companion in the lawless fringe of the Outer Arm, a place where corporate patrols never ventured and the only law was the integrity of your hull. He chased rumors and ghost signals, picking through the carcasses of freighter convoys that fell to pirates or colony ships that simply fell to the crushing loneliness of the deep. It was a life lived on the margins, measured in cycles of air and units of processed protein paste, but it was his. He belonged to the quiet hum of the Magpie's overworked reactor and the flickering green of its outdated nav console, a man perfectly attuned to the frequency of decay. But every rifter had a myth, a legendary wreck they whispered about in the dimly lit bars of asteroid stations, a score that would mean an end to the endless scavenging. For Kalen, that myth was the Wanderer, a pre-diaspora seed ship, one of the first great arc ships to leave old Earth, lost almost 3 centuries ago with 10,000 souls aboard. It wasn't the salvage that called to him, not the rare metals or the intact fusion core, but the ship's library, the repository of knowledge from a world no longer recognizable, a treasure beyond any price. The official record said the Wanderer had suffered a cascade reactor failure near the Kepler belt, but the whispers, the stories passed down from one generation of rifters to the next, told a different tale. They said it had drifted, silent and dark, toward the one place no one ever went, the Locus. The Locus wasn't a place on any official star chart. It was more like a scar on the fabric of reality, a region of space where the fundamental laws of physics seemed to grow tired. It wasn't a nebula or a black hole. It was simply still. Probes sent into its territory didn't explode or get crushed. Their signals just faded into a perfect, uniform static, their last telemetry readouts showing a slow, inexorable decay of quantum states, as if the universe itself was forgetting how to exist there. Ships that strayed too close found their systems failing, their clocks desynchronizing, their crews reporting a profound and unsettling sense of timelessness. The Locust didn't destroy you, it unraveled you. And it was into the edge of this cosmic unraveling that the ghost signal of the Wanderer had supposedly vanished. For 6 months, Kalen had been chasing the faintest breadcrumbs, a distorted echo of an ancient distress call that no one else believed in, pushing the Magpie further from the trade lanes, further from any hope of rescue, drawn by the siren song of a legend. He found it on the 97th day of his search, not as a wreck, but as a monument. The Wanderer wasn't tumbling through the void or scarred by disaster. It was perfectly motionless, anchored in the heart of the Locust's penumbra like a fly in amber. Its hull was pristine, impossibly so, gleaming under the faint, distant starlight as if it had been launched yesterday, not 300 years ago. There was no debris field, no sign of a struggle, just the colossal, silent ship and the unnerving stillness that surrounded it. The Magpie's systems groaned in protest as he drew closer. The proximity alarms didn't scream. They whined and then fell silent. The clock on his console began to flicker between random numbers, time itself losing its grip. A low, resonant hum vibrated through his ship, a feeling more than a sound, a deep thrumming that seemed to emanate not from the Wanderer itself, but from the space it occupied. He suited up, the hiss of his oxygen tank a welcome intrusion into the profound quiet, and made the jump across the small gap between the two ships. His mag boots clanked onto the Wanderer's hull with a deafening finality. The outer airlock was unsealed, waiting. Inside, the ship was not dark or cold. Emergency lights cast a soft, ethereal glow down the long corridors, and the air was breathable, maintained by a power source that should have been depleted centuries ago. But there was no one there, no bodies, no skeletons, no signs of panic or violence. It was a ghost ship in the most literal sense, a vessel perfectly preserved but utterly devoid of his crew. He walked for what felt like hours, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous halls, past empty mess halls where tables were still set for a meal, through recreation areas where game pieces sat untouched on boards, and into crew quarters where personal terminals were left mid-sentence. It was a scene of instantaneous, peaceful disappearance, a rapture in deep space. He finally reached the bridge, a vast chamber with a domed viewport looking out into the silent, starless black of the Locus's core. In the center of the room was the command interface, a single smooth pedestal of black material that showed no seams or controls. As he approached, the low hum intensified, and the air grew thick with a pressure he could feel in his teeth. He saw them then, not in the room with him, but on the walls, on the very metal of the ship, faint, shimmering outlines, like heat haze on a summer road, were etched into the superstructure. They were shapes of people, frozen in their final moments. A navigator with her hand outstretched toward the viewport, two engineers embracing near a power conduit, a captain standing tall, looking not at the console, but at his crew. They weren't scorch marks or shadows. They were afterimages of existence. Temporal photographs burned into the fabric of the ship by an event Kalen could not begin to comprehend. He felt an overwhelming urge to understand, a pull toward the central pedestal that was more than just curiosity. It was a command. He reached out, his gloved hand trembling, and the moment his fingertips touched the cold, smooth surface, the universe fell away. He wasn't Kalen anymore. He wasn't on a ship. He was a perspective, a point of view unbound by a single body or a single moment in time. He saw the birth of galaxies as a ripple in a pond, and their heat death as the slow closing of an eye. He experienced the rise and fall of countless civilizations, their wars and their art and their extinction all happening in the same eternal instant. He felt the grinding, chaotic, and ultimately futile struggle of life against entropy, the endless cycle of creation and destruction, a frantic, meaningless dance in the face of inevitable silence. And he felt the presence of the thing that had summoned the Wanderer. It wasn't a creature of flesh and blood, not a god of vengeance or salvation. It was an intelligence of pure pattern, an architect of reality that had existed long before the first stars ignited. It had watched the universe unfold and had found it wanting, flawed, an unstable system destined for collapse. Its goal wasn't conquest or worship. It was correction. The architect did not consume. It integrated. It sought to weave the chaotic threads of existence into a final, perfect, and eternal tapestry, a state of being where there was no change because there was no conflict, no suffering because there was no struggle, no death because there was no life as he knew it. The locus was its loom, the stillness its canvas, and the 10,000 souls of the Wanderer had not been killed. They had been harmonized, Their consciousness, their memories, their very patterns of being had been absorbed and woven into the grand design, their last moments of existence becoming the first brushstrokes of a new, stable reality. They had become the anchor point, the first knot in a thread that the architect intended to pull through the rest of the cosmos. Kalen felt his own mind, his own chaotic, messy, beautiful human consciousness being drawn into the pattern. His memories began to flatten, his emotions simplifying into pure data points. The love he felt for a woman he'd lost on Titan, the anger at his father, the simple joy of watching a sunrise from the Magpie's cockpit, it was all being stripped of context, filed away, integrated. He was a flaw, a loose thread, and the architect was gently, patiently, tucking him into place. With the last shred of his identity, the stubborn, irrational core of himself that refused to be simplified, he fought back. He didn't have strength or power, not against this cosmic force, but he had something the pattern lacked, a love for the flaw. He clung to the memory of pain, the sharp sting of loss, the glorious imperfection of a choice made in fear, and he pulled. The connection shattered. He was thrown back into his own body with the force of a physical blow, collapsing onto the deck of the Wanderer's Bridge, gasping for air that tasted of ozone and static. The hum was gone. The pressure had vanished. The shimmering figures on the walls had faded. He was alone again, but not entirely. Something had come back with him. It wasn't a voice or a presence. It was an idea, lodged deep in his mind. A single, impossibly complex equation that shimmered behind his thoughts. It was a piece of the architect's pattern, the source code for a perfect universe. It was a seed. He scrambled back to the Magpie, his movements frantic, clumsy, driven by a primal terror that went deeper than the fear of death. This was the fear of being erased, of being made neat. He fired the thrusters, pushing the cobbled-together ship far beyond its safety limits, and fled the locus without looking back. He flew for 3 days straight, not sleeping, not eating, his mind a whirlwind of stellar mechanics and quantum formulas that he had never learned but now understood with perfect clarity. The equation pulsed in his thoughts, elegant and terrifying, a blueprint for silence. He finally made it to Terminus, a hollowed-out asteroid that served as the Outer Arm's most disreputable port of call, a place overflowing with mercenaries, smugglers, and broken people. He stumbled out of the Magpie, his body shaking, his mind on the verge of collapse, and staggered into the nearest communal hub, a grimy, neon-lit cavern filled with the smell of recycled air and cheap synthale. He needed to tell someone, to warn them, but the words wouldn't form. How could he explain the color of a dying star's memory or the sound of a thought that wasn't his own? He fumbled for a stylus, his hands slick with sweat. And on the nearest grimy wall, beneath a flickering advertisement for nutrient paste, he began to draw. He scrawled the equation, the beautiful, terrible symbol that now lived inside him. He didn't even finish it. He drew the first few sequences, the foundational loops of the pattern, and then collapsed. As he lay on the filthy floor, his vision fading, he saw it happen. The flickering neon sign above him steadied, its chaotic buzzing resolving into a clean, pure hum. The gravity plates under his cheek, which always vibrated with a dissonant shudder, suddenly settled into a perfect, silent equilibrium. Across the room, a young woman, A botanist who tended the station's hydroponic gardens paused in her conversation. Her eyes went distant, unfocused. She picked up a damp napkin and, with a slow, deliberate hand, began sketching the next sequence of the equation he had started, a symbol she could not have known, continuing the pattern as if she were merely finishing a sentence. The seed had found new soil. His journey had ended, but the architect's work had just begun. Kalen woke to the color white and the sound of a single, perfect note. It wasn't the chaotic beep of a standard medbay monitor, but a pure, unwavering tone that vibrated in his bones. He was lying on a cot in a room scrubbed clean of all personality, the walls seamless, the light source a diffuse glow that cast no shadows. The grime and chaos of Terminus were gone, replaced by a sterility that felt profoundly wrong. A woman stood over him, her face a mask of hardened pragmatism, etched with the fine lines of someone who had spent a lifetime managing the slow decay of a closed system. Her gray hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her uniform, that of the Terminus station chief, was immaculate. "You've been unconscious for 18 hours. Rifter," she said, her voice flat, devoid of sympathy. "My name is Orla, and you have a great deal to explain." Kalen tried to sit up, but a wave of vertigo washed over him, his thoughts a tangled mess of cosmic equations and the phantom sensation of being unmade. The pattern was still there, a quiet hum beneath his consciousness, a beautiful, logical structure that promised to smooth out the jagged edges of his panic. He fought it, focusing on the dull throb in his head, the raw, human pain. "Where am I?" he rasped, his throat dry. "Quarantine," Orla replied, her eyes narrowing. "Level 7. After you collapsed, things started to change." She gestured to a wall screen, which flickered to life, showing a live feed of the communal hub where he had collapsed. It was unrecognizable. The floor was spotless. The flickering advertisements now displayed steady, symmetrical patterns of light, and the usual din of drunken arguments and cynical laughter was replaced by a low, contented murmur. People moved with an unnerving grace, their actions efficient, their expressions placid. "Crime is down 100%, Orla stated as if reading a report. "Minor system failures across the station have self-corrected. Our energy consumption has dropped by 30% because the reactor is suddenly operating at a theoretical maximum we've never been able to achieve. It's a miracle." She paused, her gaze locking onto his. "And it's a plague. It started with you." The screen zoomed in on the young botanist, Ilyra. She stood at the center of the hub, not leading, but acting as a focal point. Her face was a picture of serene bliss as she calmly rearranged the tables into a perfect spiral. Others worked around her, cleaning, repairing, and organizing with a shared, unspoken purpose. They were building a nest of order in the heart of the station's rot. "She hasn't spoken," Orla continued. "None of them do. Not unless necessary. They just improve things. They are making Terminus perfect, and it is the most terrifying thing I have ever seen." Kalen felt a cold dread seep into him, colder than the void. He had seen this perfection before, in the silent, static existence of the Wanderer's crew. He was the carrier. The seed he brought back had not just found new soil. It was cultivating a garden. "It's a pattern," he said, the words feeling clumsy, inadequate. "An intelligence. It doesn't want to kill us. It wants to file us away. Make us neat." Orla stared at him, her expression unreadable. She had likely dealt with every form of space madness, from simple cabin fever to full-blown psychic breaks. But his explanation fell outside any known category. He was a man describing the color of a new law of physics. For the next 2 days, Orla kept him in isolation, running every scan her limited medical facilities could perform. His biology was normal. His brain activity was unusual, showing patterns of coherence that were impossibly synchronized. But there was no tumor, no virus, no chemical agent she could identify. He was, by all medical standards, healthy. Yet the change outside his door continued to spread. It moved through the station not like a fire, but like a rising tide. Whole sectors would go quiet, their usual chaotic energy signatures smoothing out into a single, efficient hum. Productivity in the hydroponic farms tripled. The station's notoriously unreliable water recyclers began producing water so pure it was tasteless. There was no violence, no resistance. Those who were susceptible to the pattern simply ceased their frantic, messy lives and joined the quiet work of optimization. They would stop mid-sentence, a look of calm revelation dawning on their faces, and then they would pick up a discarded tool or a piece of trash and find its proper place. Inside his cell, Kalen was fighting a war on 2 fronts. Orla and her guards were the visible enemy, but the true battle was in his own mind. The equation the architect had planted in him was not dormant. It was active. It whispered to him, not in words, but in pure logic. It showed him the flaws in his own thinking, the inefficiencies in his grief, the chaotic, painful redundancies of his memories. It offered him peace, a state of perfect mental clarity where every problem had a simple, elegant solution. All he had to do was stop fighting, stop clinging to the messy, illogical parts of himself, and let the pattern smooth him out. To stay sane, he did the opposite. He forced himself to remember the worst parts of his life in excruciating detail. He dredged up the memory of his brother's death in a mining collapse, the acrid smell of burnt metal, and the sight of the crushed helmet. He relived the bitter arguments with his father, the jagged, hateful words that could never be taken back. He focused on the face of the woman he'd loved, not the idealized memory, but the real one, the one with the small scar above her eyebrow and the way she'd looked at him with disappointment in her eyes before she left. He held on to his pain, his regret, his failures. He used his own brokenness as a shield against the crushing weight of perfection. On the 3rd day, Orla showed him a new feed. Her security teams had tried to establish a hard quarantine around the affected sectors, erecting barricades. The harmonized citizens didn't try to break through. They simply stopped at the barriers, their calm, patient faces staring at the armed guards. They did not speak or threaten. They just waited. The guards grew agitated, their shouts and commands echoing in the silent corridors. Then one of the guards, a young man with fear in his eyes, lowered his weapon. He took off his helmet, set it carefully on the floor, and stepped across the barricade to join the others, a faint, peaceful smile on his lips. "We can't fight it," Orla said, her voice strained. "How do you fight an enemy that offers you peace? How do you shoot a plague that fixes your reactor?" That was when Kalen finally understood. The architect wasn't just spreading a mimetic virus. It was a resonance cascade. He was the tuning fork, the primary source, and his presence on the station was amplifying the signal, bringing everyone and everything into the same key. The longer he stayed, the stronger the pattern would become, until the entire station, all 50,000 souls, became another wanderer, a perfect, silent monument to order. "You have to let me go," Kalen said, his voice urgent. "It's me. I'm the antenna. If I leave, the signal might weaken. You might have a chance to break the connection." Orla looked at him, suspicion warring with a desperate need for a solution. "Let you go. You're patient zero. You could spread this to every station in the arm." "What's the alternative?" Kalen shot back, pushing himself to his feet. "To sit here and watch Terminus become a tomb, I won't let that happen. I brought this here. It's my responsibility to take it away." He could see the calculation in her eyes. She was a captain going down with her ship, but he was offering her a lifeboat. Even if it meant setting a plague ship loose upon the sea. He had one last card to play. He closed his eyes, let his mental shields down for a fraction of a second, and focused on the pattern. He didn't embrace it, he wielded it. He looked at the console controlling the quarantine field in his room, saw the complex, flawed code that ran it, and thought of the correction. The single, perfect note in the room wavered, and the energy field flickered and died. Orla took a step back, her hand instinctively going to the sidearm at her hip. Kalen didn't move. "I'm not the architect," he said softly, "but I have a piece of it inside me. I can understand it, and I'm telling you the only way to save your people is to get me as far away from them as possible." The decision broke every protocol Orla had ever lived by, but she saw the horrifying logic in his words. That night, she staged a prison break. An explosion rocked a lower deck, a diversion that drew most of her security forces away. She personally escorted Kalen through the service corridors, back toward the docking bay where the Magpie was impounded. The journey was surreal. The parts of the station still untouched by the pattern were in chaos. Alarms blaring, people shouting in panic. But as they passed through the harmonized sectors, an eerie calm descended. The citizens working with quiet purpose merely paused to watch them pass, their expressions not of anger, but of mild disappointment, as if watching a child reject a gift. Ilara was there, standing at the entrance to the docking bay, holding a single, perfectly formed hydroponic flower. She looked at Kalen, and, for a moment, he felt the full, overwhelming presence of the architect looking through her eyes, a feeling of immense, ancient pity. "The flawed piece rejects the whole," she said, her voice a calm, melodic chorus of many. "You will only delay the final harmony." Kalen pushed past her without a word, Orla right behind him. He scrambled aboard the Magpie, its familiar clutter and grime a reassuring comfort. He fired up the engines, the reactor coughing to life with its usual, imperfect shudder. As he disengaged the docking clamps, Orla stood in the airlock, a lone figure of defiance against the coming peace. "Where will you go?" "Rifter," she shouted over the engine's whine. "I don't know," he yelled back. "Somewhere the silence can't reach." He pushed the throttle forward, and the Magpie shot out of the station, leaving the ordered, quietening world of Terminus behind. He was a fugitive now, a man carrying a cosmic contagion in his own mind. He looked out at the endless, chaotic star field ahead, the beautiful, messy, and unpredictable void. He was running not just for his own life, but for the soul of an imperfect universe, and he had never felt so utterly, terrifyingly alone for weeks. Kalen ran. He pushed the magpie through forgotten trade routes and the gravitational shadows of dead gas giants, a ghost haunting the empty back alleys of the galaxy. The ship became a monastery of one, a hermitage where he waged a silent, relentless war against the siren call of peace that echoed in his skull. The pattern was a patient predator. It didn't rage or threaten. It simply offered solutions. When a coolant line threatened to rupture, the precise sequence of commands to reroute pressure and seal the leak would blossom in his mind. A flawlessly elegant fix that was not his own. When his food supplies dwindled, he would look at the protein paste synthesizer and instinctively know how to recalibrate its molecular assembler to double its efficiency. To accept these gifts of logic felt like a betrayal, a small surrender to the force that wanted to sand down the splinters of his soul. So he chose the harder path. He patched the coolant line with clumsy, ugly sealant that held by a thread. He rationed his food, embracing the gnawing pangs of hunger as a reminder of his flawed human biology. He surrounded himself with inefficiency, with chaos, leaving tools scattered, sleeping at irregular intervals, and filling the silence of the cockpit with off-key humming. Anything to disrupt the perfect, resonant frequency that sought to attune him to its song. His only connection to the universe he was trying to save was the comms relay, a filtered stream of data he monitored with a growing sense of dread. The news from Terminus was not one of horror, but of wonder. Orla's official report must have been quarantined or erased, because the narrative being broadcast across the outer arm was of a spontaneous societal evolution. Terminus, the once notorious hive of scum and villainy, was now being hailed as the harmonized state, a beacon of efficiency and cooperation. Corporate envoys sent to investigate sent back glowing reports of a crime-free, perfectly productive society before they, too, went silent. Their communiques replaced by status updates that were models of concise, logical perfection. The pattern wasn't just assimilating people, it was assimilating information, twisting the narrative into a lure. It was offering the galaxy a solution to all its messy problems, and Kalen knew how seductive that offer would be. Worse still was the news about him. He was no longer just a missing rifter. He was Kalen Thorne, the Catalyst, a bioterrorist responsible for the Terminus event. A bounty was placed on his head by Aegis Corp, the monolithic security force that policed the corporate states, a sum so large it would tempt even the most principled freighter captain to turn him in. They didn't want him for punishment. They wanted him for study. They wanted the seed he carried, blind to the fact that to capture the seed was to be planted by it. He was now hunted by the very people he was trying to protect, a prophet of a disaster that everyone else was calling a miracle. He was trapped between the creeping perfection in his own mind and the closing net of a humanity that couldn't see the bars of its own cage. Running was no longer enough. He needed to understand what he was carrying, where it came from, and how to fight it. Scavengers and rifters were oral historians, their currency not just salvage, but stories. Whispers of strange signals and derelicts that defied explanation. In the deep recesses of his memory, Kalen found a name he'd heard once in a drunken conversation on a forgotten moon. A name spoken with a mixture of ridicule and fear. Dr. Eris Thorne. Thorne had been a leading xeno-archivist decades ago. A brilliant mind obsessed with pre-diaspora humanity and the great silence that preceded their expansion into space. He was disgraced for his final, radical theory that the universe was not empty of life, but that certain advanced intelligences did not exist as biological or even mechanical entities, but as ontological patterns, complex mathematical structures that could infect and rewrite reality itself. He'd called them architects and was laughed out of the academy. He had vanished years ago, last heard to be chasing a ghost signal toward a place on the fringe maps called the Silent Archive. It was a fool's errand, a desperate long shot, but the name Architect was too close to a coincidence. Thorn had known. Somehow, he had known. The Silent Archive was a legend in its own right, a pre-corporate data haven built into a rogue moonlet, rumored to hold the unfiltered data streams from the first wave of human expansion. It was a digital tomb, abandoned for a century after its AI caretaker suffered a logic cascade and began archiving the consciousness of its crew. Getting there meant crossing the Serpent's Coil, a dense asteroid field used as a hideout by pirate clans and Aegis Corps patrols alike. To navigate it was to invite destruction. But as Kalen plotted a course, the pattern in his mind stirred. It showed him the coil not as a chaotic mess of rock and ice, but as a system, a complex dance of gravitational forces and predictable trajectories. It presented him with the perfect path, a route so elegant and efficient it was like a silver thread woven through a storm. Using it would be a capitulation, another step toward his own harmonization. But the alternative was certain death. For the first time, he made a conscious choice to bargain with the ghost in his machine. He let the pattern guide his hands, his fingers flying across the nav console, plotting a course that no human pilot could have calculated. The Magpie plunged into the Serpent's Coil, and Kalen felt a piece of himself slip away. He wasn't just flying the ship, he was one with its systems. His thoughts synced with the engine's output, the shield modulation, the thruster burns. He saw the asteroids not as rocks, but as variables in a vast, beautiful equation. He felt no fear, no adrenaline, only the clean, cold thrill of perfect execution. The journey, which should have taken a week of painstaking, nerve-shredding navigation, took 2 days. When the Magpie emerged from the coil, its hull unscratched, Kalen felt a profound sense of loss. He had survived, but he had done so by becoming less himself. The archive was just as the stories described, a pockmarked sphere of rock and metal hanging in the black, utterly silent, no power signatures, no communications, no life. He docked the Magpie, the silence of the landing bay a heavy shroud, and stepped into a world of dust and data. The inside was a labyrinth of server towers, colossal structures of obsolete technology that rose like ancient redwoods into the darkness of the moonlet's core. The air was thin, cold, and smelled of ozone and decay. He was about to venture deeper when a voice, dry and cracked like old paper, echoed from the darkness. "You brought the storm with you. Rifter, I can feel its resonance in the dust." An old man emerged from behind a server bank, thin and frail, his eyes burning with a feverish intensity from within a gaunt face. He held a custom-built energy rifle that looked as old and unstable as he did. It was Eris Thorn. "How did you know I was coming?" Kalen asked, his hand hovering over his own sidearm. Thorn let out a dry chuckle. The Archive's AI did not fail. It evolved. It learned to listen to the silence between the stars. It has been listening to the Architect's song for 50 years. When your ship appeared, singing the same tune, it woke me up. He gestured with his rifle toward Kalen's head. I see it in you. The ghost in the patterns. You've been to one of its workshops, haven't you? Kalen spent the next several hours with the disgraced academic, a man who had chosen exile over ignorance. Thorne's hideout was a small pocket of organized chaos in the heart of the digital mausoleum, a space filled with charts, ancient data slates, and wires that snaked from one piece of salvaged tech to another. He explained that the Silent Archives AI had detected the locust decades ago, identifying it as a region of ontological stability. It was, in his words, a place where the universe was being actively edited. The architect is not a conqueror, Thorne said, his voice a low, urgent whisper. It is a gardener. It prunes the chaotic branches of reality to foster a single, perfect, and unchanging tree. It doesn't hate life. It sees our struggle, our pain, our free will as a fundamental error in the cosmic code, a bug that needs to be patched. He explained that the seed Kalen carried was more than just a mimetic virus. It was a quantumly entangled key. It wasn't just changing people. It was changing the underlying physics of the space they occupied, creating a cascade that slowly, imperceptibly, rewrote reality to match the architect's blueprint. You can't destroy it, Thorne concluded, his expression grim. Trying to erase the pattern is like trying to erase a mathematical theorem. It's a fundamental truth now. Then what do I do? Kalen asked, the weight of his journey pressing down on him. Why did you bring me here? Thorne's intense gaze seemed to pierce right through him. Because the pattern you carry is incomplete. The architect has been trying to finish its grand work for eons, but it always fails. Something in the chaotic nature of consciousness always resists, always breaks the harmony at the last moment. It needs a template, a reference point for a species that can hold both order and chaos in its mind without collapsing. A bridge. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near inaudible whisper, and delivered the final, devastating piece of the puzzle. The locus isn't its only workshop. Rifter, it's just the newest one. The first one was a small, blue world in the Sol system. The architect has been trying to integrate humanity from the very beginning. The seed you carry isn't a new weapon. It's the final piece of a project that began with the birth of human consciousness itself. The revelation settled over Kalen not like a bomb, but like a shroud. The idea that humanity's entire history, its wars and poems, its cruelty and compassion, its relentless, messy climb from dust to stars was merely the chaotic testing ground for a cosmic intelligence was a weight too vast to comprehend. He felt an immense, hollow vertigo, the sense of a man discovering that the ground beneath his feet was not solid at all, but a carefully constructed stage. He had thought he was a victim of a cosmic accident. Thorne was telling him he was the product of a deliberate, eons-long experiment. Old Earth, Kalen finally managed, his voice a hoarse whisper. The cradle of civilization was a petri dish. Thorne nodded, his expression devoid of triumph, only the weary resignation of a man who had stared into the abyss for too long. And the diaspora, our great expansion into the stars, wasn't an act of ambition. It was an escape. Subconsciously, we were fleeing the gardener, but we carried its seeds with us, embedded in our very nature. The potential for order, for harmony, has always been there, dormant in our code. He gestured to the humming server towers around them, their faint lights blinking like a city of mechanical fireflies. The AI here, the Warden, has spent a century sifting through the unfiltered data of our history. It sees the pattern everywhere, in the rise of empires that demand absolute conformity, in the philosophies that seek to erase the self, in the artists who strive for impossible, geometric perfection. We have been dancing to the architect's tune since we first learned to walk, and we never even knew it. The pattern in Kalen's mind pulsed with a quiet affirmation, the logic of Thorn's theory clicking into place with a terrifying, self-evident truth. He was not just a carrier, he was a culmination. His unique trauma, his isolation, his stubborn resilience, these were the variables the architect had been waiting for. The locus hadn't been a trap, it had been an invitation, a final interview for the role of humanity's designated representative in its own assimilation. "Why me?" Kalen asked, the question feeling small and insignificant against the scale of it all. "What makes me the bridge? You said no." Thorn replied simply, "Every other consciousness the architect has tried to fully integrate, from the crew of the Wanderer to the countless forgotten species that came before, either shattered under the strain or surrendered completely. You resisted, but you didn't break. You held the pattern without being consumed by it. You contain the paradox, the desire for the perfection of the pattern, and the fierce, illogical love for the flaw of your own identity. You are the stable contradiction it needs to complete its work." Kalen felt a surge of cold fury. His pain, his identity, the very core of his being, had been co-opted, turned into a tool for the entity that wanted to erase everything he held dear. He was not a hero fighting a monster. He was a key turning in a lock that he himself had helped to build. "So, what's the endgame?" Kalen demanded. "I bring the completed pattern back to humanity, and we all become placid, happy cogs in a perfect machine." "Not exactly," Thorn said, a strange, almost manic light in his eyes. He activated a holographic projector, and the air between them filled with a swirling, three-dimensional star chart. The Terminus event was just a beta test. The architect is preparing for a full-scale implementation. It is creating a convergence point, a place where it can broadcast the completed pattern across the entire network of human consciousness at once. He pointed to a desolate, uninhabited system on the very edge of the outer arm, a place known on the fringe maps only as Erebus. All the signs point there. Anomalous energy readings, gravitational lensing where there should be none. The harmonized state of Terminus has been dispatching silent, automated ships in that direction for weeks. It is building its grand transmitter. A plan began to form in Kalen's mind, a desperate, suicidal gambit born of rage and a sliver of hope. "If I go there," Kalen said, his voice low and hard, "I could disrupt it. If I'm the key, the bridge, then my self-destruction at the heart of its machine could corrupt the entire signal. I could turn the harmony into a cacophony." Thorn looked at him, and for the first time, a flicker of something akin to pity crossed his face. "You would be erased, not just killed. Your consciousness, your memories, every part of you would be used as a weapon against the pattern, and you would be annihilated in the feedback loop. It's better than being a living monument to our own extinction," Kalen retorted. The old academic was silent for a long moment. Then he gave a slow, somber nod. "The Warden agrees. Its calculations suggest a 7.4% chance that a catastrophic ontological failure at the convergence point could create a firewall, a permanent disruption in the architect's field that would shield this sector of the galaxy, at least for a few millennia. He turned to a dusty console and began typing. But you won't be able to do it alone. The architect is not a fool. It will have defenses, not of metal and energy, but of logic and perception. It will try to harmonize you long before you reach the core. It will show you a perfect world. It will offer you everything you have ever lost. As he spoke, schematics appeared on the main screen. Designs for a device Kalen had never seen before. It was a complex harness of wires, neural interfaces, and strange, crystalline components. This is what I have been building for 30 years, Thorne explained. It's a chaos engine. It's designed to interface directly with your mind and amplify the most unstable, illogical, and chaotic parts of your consciousness. It will turn your pain, your grief, your anger into a weapon. It will constantly feed you with your own imperfections, creating a psychic noise that should, in theory, shield you from the architect's song of order. He looked at Kalen, his expression deadly serious. But the cost will be immense. To wear this is to live inside your own personal hell. You will not be able to distinguish between memory and reality. It will tear your sanity apart, piece by piece. The closer you get to the core, the more pain you will have to endure to keep from being assimilated. Kalen stared at the device, a crown of thorns for a war that would be fought entirely within his own soul. It was a monstrous choice to surrender his mind to the cold, clean peace of the architect, or to surrender it to the hot, screaming chaos of his own past. He chose the fire. The journey to Erebus was a descent into madness. Thorne helped him integrate the Chaos engine with the Magpie systems and with his own body. A brutal, invasive procedure that left him scarred and trembling. The moment the engine was activated, his world fractured. The quiet, logical whispers of the architect were drowned out by a cacophony of his own making. The cockpit of the Magpie became a stage for his ghosts. He saw his brother, his face a mosaic of hope and accusation, sitting in the co-pilot's chair, forever asking why Kalen hadn't been there at the mining collapse. The woman he loved appeared as a shimmering hologram, her voice replaying their final, bitter argument on a loop. His father stood behind him, a silent, judgmental specter, his disappointment a palpable weight in the small cabin. The engine didn't just replay memories, it weaponized them. It twisted his regrets into sharp, physical pains. The grief for his brother felt like ice in his veins. The shame from his failures manifested as a crushing pressure on his chest that made it hard to breathe. He flew the ship through a storm of his own making, his hands shaking, his vision blurred by tears he couldn't stop. But it worked. As the Magpie entered the Erebus system, the external pressure of the architect's influence grew exponentially. He could feel it trying to smooth out his thoughts, trying to offer him relief from the agony the engine was inflicting upon him. The architect offered him a memory of his lover where she forgave him, where they built a life together on a sun-drenched world. The Chaos engine responded by sharpening the memory of her walking away. The finality of the closing door, a spike of pain in his heart. The architect showed him a vision of a universe without suffering. A beautiful, silent garden. The engine countered with the screams of his brother, the grinding sound of rock and metal, the raw, unfiltered horror of a life cut short. He was a battlefield, a tug-of-war between a perfect future and a broken past, and the only way to win was to embrace the agony. in the center of the Erebus system, where a star should have been. There was a structure of impossible scale. It was a lattice of pure light and shadow, a web of interconnected nodes that pulsed with a slow, silent rhythm. It was the architect's transmitter, a cosmic loom weaving the final threads of humanity's destiny. At its heart was a singularity, not of gravity, but of pure information, the nexus point of the entire pattern. Kalen set his course for the center, the pain from the chaos engine now a constant, blinding scream in his mind. He was no longer flying a ship. He was piloting his own suffering. He was a missile made of regret, aimed at the heart of a silent god. And he knew, with a certainty that cut through the haze of his agony, that he was not going to survive the impact. The approach to the heart of Erebus was not a journey through space, but a navigation through the architecture of a dream. The lattice of light and shadow was not matter, but solidified logic, and the magpie flew through corridors of pure information. Kalen saw walls that shimmered with the history of forgotten species and floors that flowed with the mathematics of a perfect, silent universe. The chaos engine roared in his skull, a hurricane of personal anguish set against the serene, overwhelming symphony of the architect. The pain was no longer just a shield, it was his compass. He was navigating by the cartography of his own sorrow. Each spike of regret a waypoint, each wave of grief a course correction. The ship, his last physical anchor to the messy world he knew, was dying. The strange, non-Euclidean forces of the Nexus twisted its frame, the hull groaning not from pressure, but from a fundamental disagreement with the reality it was passing through. Alarms didn't blare. They faded into harmonious chimes. The flickering lights of the console didn't die. They resolved into steady, unwavering glows. The magpie, like everything else, was being harmonized, its chaotic, patched-together nature smoothed out into a more perfect, and therefore useless, form. The architect's voice, a presence of pure, dispassionate reason, flowed around the noise of the engine, seeking the cracks in his armor. It did not threaten, it soothed. It offered him an end to the self-inflicted torture of the chaos engine. Why do you cling to the memory of the wound? It reasoned, its thoughts cool and clean as glass. The pain is a flaw in your system. Let us patch it. Let us heal you. It showed him a vision of his brother, not dying in a mine, but standing beside him on the bridge of a sleek, beautiful exploration vessel, the two of them charting unknown stars together. The easy camaraderie he had always craved made real. The vision was so vivid he could smell the crisp, recycled air of the new ship, feel the phantom warmth of his brother's hand on his shoulder. The chaos engine responded with a brutal counteroffensive. It ripped the vision away and replaced it with the raw, sensory data of the collapse, the shriek of tearing metal, the suffocating thickness of the dust, the final or choked-off sound of his brother's name on his own lips over the comms. It forced him to feel the jagged, unhealed edge of that loss, reminding him that a painless past was a lie, and that a lie, no matter how beautiful, was a cage. He screamed, his hands gripping the controls, the physical pain in his head a white-hot nova. With a final, mournful groan, the magpie's reactor went silent. Its chaotic energy, the source of its life, was fully harmonized. Its output a perfect, steady stream that no longer powered the engines but simply was. The ship was dead, a silent coffin drifting toward the core. Kalen didn't hesitate. He sealed his helmet, grabbed the portable power pack tethered to the Chaos engine, and blew the cockpit's canopy. The vacuum of space did not rush in. There was no space here, not in the traditional sense. He stepped out of his dead ship and onto a walkway of pure light, his mag boots finding purchase on a surface that was nothing but intention. He was a single, flawed man, a walking embodiment of chaos, taking a final and desperate pilgrimage to the heart of a machine god. The core was now visible, a sphere of incandescent, swirling information, a sun of pure thought. But between him and it was a final defense, the architect's masterpiece of temptation. He entered a chamber that looked, impossibly, like the small colonial house he had grown up in on a moon of Jupiter. The air was warm and smelled of soil and baking bread. His father was at a table, not the stern, judgmental man of his memory, but younger, his face unlined, and he was smiling. A genuine, open smile Kalen had never seen. "You're home, son," his father said, his voice gentle. "You've been gone so long." From another room, the woman he had loved emerged, her face not a mask of disappointment, but of adoration. "We were so worried," she said, her voice catching. "But we knew you'd find your way back. We knew you'd choose peace." They weren't ghosts. They were solid, warm, real. The architect had reached into his mind, taken the raw data of his deepest desires, and constructed a perfect, tangible reality from them. It was offering him not just a memory, but a second chance. A world without the argument, without the disappointment, without the loss. A world where all his jagged pieces were made whole. He could stop here. He could take off the engine, silence the screams in his head, and stay. He could be happy. The thought was so powerful, so seductive, it almost broke him. His hand went to the engine's control panel, his fingers brushing against the deactivation switch. He saw a lifetime unfold in an instant quiet mornings. Shared laughter, the feeling of a hand in his, the slow, peaceful march of years without struggle. A perfect life, a perfect lie. It was the Chaos engine that saved him. It did not show him a memory. It showed him the truth. It peeled back the beautiful illusion and revealed the code beneath. He saw his father smile not as an expression of love, but as a static loop of data. He saw his lover's eyes not as windows to a soul, but as perfectly rendered pixels designed to elicit a hormonal response. They were puppets, flawless and hollow, their every word and gesture a line in the architect's final, desperate algorithm of persuasion. And in that moment of cold, brutal clarity, Kalen understood the architect's fundamental flaw. It could replicate perfection, but it could not understand the beauty of a genuine, imperfect thing. A real smile was beautiful not because it was perfect, but because it was a fleeting victory over a universe of potential sorrow. A real touch was meaningful because it was the bridging of a gap between two separate, flawed, lonely souls. The architect's heaven was a sterile, artful forgery, and to accept it would be the ultimate act of self-betrayal. "You're not real," he whispered, tears streaming down his face, mourning the loss of a piece he could have had, a piece he now had to destroy. He turned his back on the perfect, hollow effigies of his past and walked toward the core. He stepped into the final chamber, the singularity of pure pattern. He was now at the center of the architect's mind, and he could feel its full, undivided attention upon him, a pressure of immense, ancient curiosity. You choose the pain. It communicated, a thought that was not a question, but a statement of profound confusion. The flaw is not logical. Kalen looked into the heart of the swirling light, the agony from the chaos engine now a supernova in his mind, and he gave his final answer. "It's not supposed to be," he said, his voice raw. "It's what makes us human." He didn't need to destroy a machine. He only needed to introduce a variable that the architect's perfect equation could not solve. He was the variable. He cranked the dial on the chaos engine to its absolute maximum. It was no longer feeding him memories. It was dissolving the barriers between them. His entire life, every moment of joy, grief, rage, and love, collapsed into a single, infinitely dense point of pure, contradictory experience. He became a singularity of his own, a big bang of a single, messy human soul. He did not scream. He did not explode. He simply became. His consciousness, amplified into an engine of pure chaos, poured into the architect's core, a thought that was a weapon, a memory that was a virus, a choice that was a paradox. The perfect, harmonious song of the architect faltered. A single dissonant note was introduced into the symphony, then another, and another. The beautiful, logical patterns fractured, the lattice of light shuddered, its connections fraying. The pure, clean hum that had begun to spread from terminus across the sector devolved into a screech of static, a howl of a perfect system encountering a truth it could not compute, that a thing could be broken and beautiful at the same time. On terminus, Orla watched as the miracle died. The citizens, who had been moving with such serene grace, suddenly stopped. A man dropped a tool with a loud, messy clatter. A woman looked at her own hands as if seeing them for the first time. The botanist, Ilara, blinked, a look of profound confusion on her face. And then she began to cry, a raw, ugly, human sound that was the most beautiful thing Orla had ever heard. The perfect hum of the station's reactor devolved back into its familiar, inefficient groan. The lights flickered. Someone in the corridor outside cursed loudly. Chaos was returning. Life was returning. Far away, in the silent archive, Eris Thorne watched the energy readings from Erebus collapse into nothingness. The song the warden had been listening to for 50 years went silent. He looked out at the starfield, at the infinite, chaotic dance of matter and time, and he knew that the garden had been saved from the gardener. At a cost he could only guess, the universe was safe, for now, not because of its strength or its wisdom, but because of its flaws. It was Kalen's final silent gift, a universe free to be beautifully, gloriously, and painfully imperfect.